In the sweltering summer of 1942, the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean wasn't merely a theater of war. It was a sprawling, sun-baked graveyard, masquerading as an idyllic paradise. Endless blue skies arched over jagged coral reefs and remote, palm-shrouded islands, where the turquoise waters lapped innocently at white sands. But hidden beneath that serene vast canopy, death glided on silk-smooth wings emblazoned with a rising sun emblem. The Mitsubishi A6M0, sleek as a predator's shadow, unforgiving as a typhoon's gale, a mere whisper of silk stretched over bamboo spars, dominated it all without mercy. Conceived in the meticulous drawing boards of the brilliant engineer Jiro Horikoshi, this wasn't just another airplane. It was a solemn promise forged in the crucible of imperial ambition. Light as a fleeting haiku, agile as the lethal arc of a katana slicing through mist, the Zero danced through the heavens as if the wind itself bowed in submission. Its top speed, a blistering 331 miles per hour at altitude, slicing through the air like a scalpel. Climb rate? An astonishing 3,100 feet per minute. A vertical sprint that left bulkier adversaries gasping, their engines wheezing in futile pursuit. And its armament? Twin 20mm cannons mounted in the wings, belching fire like the furious breath of ancient dragons, capable of shredding aluminum airframes and fragile human bone with the same cold indifference. Japan's elite pilots, battle-hardened in the brutal skies over China and emboldened by the thunderous shadow of Pearl Harbor just months earlier, flew this machine not as passengers, but as seamless extensions of their own indomitable souls. They were aces long before the term became a faded Hollywood trope. Men like Saburo Sakai, whose eyes gleamed like sharpened steel beneath his flight helmet, methodically racking up kills that blurred into the of whispered legend, his tally climbing to over 60 confirmed victories by war's end. Or Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, the infamous Devil of Rabaul, who twisted through frenzied dogfights with a predatory grace that seemed to mock the very laws of physics, his maneuvers so fluid they left enemy pilots questioning their own sanity. To these samurai of the sky, the boundless Pacific was no indifferent arena. It was a sacred canvas for the timeless code of Bushido, where every triumphant loop, every razor-sharp roll, painted a brushstroke of inevitability and honor. And for the young Americans thrust into this aerial coliseum, it was nothing short of terror, etched indelibly in the white vapor trails of doom that crisscrossed the dawn. Gallagher's letter said, "Mom, it's not the bullets I fear, it's the waiting. Every dawn patrol, you climb out there knowing the Zeros are ghosts in the clouds. They spot you first, turn on you like wolves on a lame deer. Our wildcats, God, they're tough birds, Grumman ironed through and through. But they're fat cows next to those snakes. Dive and zoom, that's the drill. Never turn and fight, but sometimes you have to. And when you do, you hear it. The whistle. Then the world tilts and your wingman's gone. Just smoke and a name on a list." Fear in those harrowing months wasn't some lofty, abstract specter haunting strategy sessions back in Washington. It was raw, visceral, a churning knot deep in the gut that twisted tighter with every urgent radio crackle slicing through the static. Bandits, 12 o'clock high. These American flyers, wide-eyed boys, barely out of their teens, plucked from dusty stateside airfields where the gravest peril had been a fickle crosswind or a bumpy grass strip, launched from the heaving decks of carriers like the battered USS Yorktown and the stalwart USS Enterprise, their hearts hammering like war drums against the bulky confines of their yellow Mae West life vests. The Grumman F4F Wildcat, America's gritty best shot at even approaching parity in this lopsided duel, was a tenacious brawler at heart, stubby-nosed and squat, armored like a Sherman tank rolling into hedgerow hell. It could absorb punishment that would eviscerate lesser aircraft outright, its self-sealing fuel tanks and rugged framework shrugging off cannon fire that tore through wings and fuselages like paper. But true parity? That cruel mirage dangled just out of reach, a bitter joke whispered in the humid confines of ready rooms. The Zero outclimbed the Wildcat handily, its lightweight frame allowing it to surge upward like a startled falcon. It turned tighter, on a dime almost, outmaneuvering the American fighter like elusive smoke slipping through desperate fingers. A Wildcat pilot, sweat stinging his eyes, might squeeze the trigger on his synchronized battery of .650 caliber machine guns, unleashing a furious bark of lead that stitched the sky. But by then, the Zero was already a ghost, vanishing in a heart-stopping loop that inverted the world, repositioning flawlessly for the killing shot from the enemy's blind spot. The human cost of this imbalance? It filled blood-soaked ledgers that no sterile briefing room in Pearl Harbor or Noumea could ever hope to balance. Each entry a fresh wound on the soul of a nation. Consider Midway, that pivotal June inferno of 1942. The battle historians would later hail as the war's turning point, a desperate roll of the dice that halted Japan's island-hopping juggernaut. But in the blistering, oil-slicked immediacy of the moment, it was unadulterated carnage, a symphony of screams and explosions that echoed across the waves. Torpedo bombers, lumbering like sacrificial lambs, were shredded mid-run before they could even release their deadly fish into the carrier lanes. Dive bombers, plunging from the sun like avenging angels, were picked off one by one like fragile clay pigeons shattering under a marksman's fire. Letter Commander John Waldron's gallant Torpedo Squadron 8. 30 brave young men crammed into the obsolescent Douglas TBD Devastators, aircraft so slow and vulnerable they seemed built for regret rather than redemption, pressed forward in a suicidal straight-line charge right into the gaping maw of the Japanese carrier force. Not a single plane limped home. Waldron's final, defiant transmission crackled over the ether like a ghost's farewell. "We are attacking. Tally 1 bomber and 1 fighter." Then, an eternity of silence swallowed by static. Zeros swarmed the formation like ravenous sharks scenting blood, their 20mm shells punching ragged holes through flimsy fuselages, igniting avgas tanks in cataclysmic blossoms of orange hellfire that lit the dawn like false sunrises. Bodies cartwheeled into the churning sea below, parachutes fluttering unopened like white surrender flags, transforming living men into spectral ghosts before the waves claimed them forever. And the terror didn't confine itself to the open skies. It seeped like black oil into the very steel hearts of the mighty carriers themselves, corroding morale from the keel up. Deck crews, swarthy, salt-crusted kids hauled straight from the Brooklyn waterfronts or the endless cornfields of Iowa, huddled at the steam catapults and arrestor wires, their calloused hands white-knuckled on signal paddles, eyes locked on the shimmering horizon as the last Wildcat's silhouette dwindled into the blinding blue. Those agonizing minutes stretched into subjective eternities, each second a hammer blow against fragile hope. Then, the ragged returns began. One shadowy form materializing low on the water, then 2, maybe 5, if fortune smiled that day. But the yawning empty slots in the chalked landing circle aboard ship told the unspoken tragedy, a geometry of grief. Hands trembled uncontrollably as they chalked the returning wheels and snaked heavy hoses across the deck to douse smoldering engines belching acrid smoke. "Where's Jimmy?" A voice would inevitably mutter from the shadows, cracking like thin spring ice underfoot. No answer came, just the relentless slap of Pacific swells against the hull and the fading, metallic thunder of anti-aircraft guns cooling in their mounts, barrels still warm from futile salvos. John Thach knew this dread intimately, etched bone-deep into his tactician's soul like shrapnel scars. Jimmy, to the men who trusted him with their lives, he'd borne witness to Zeros carving through his squadron with the merciless efficiency of a farm scythe slicing ripe wheat at harvest. Back at Wake Island in that desperate December of '41, he'd seen America's vaunted first-line fighter. At the Brewster F-2A Buffalo, lightly built and woefully undergunned, reduced to so much flaming scrap metal littering the atoll's runway like discarded toys. Those poor machines folded under the Zero's relentless assault, their pilots ejected into the inferno or the sea without a prayer. Thach himself clawed survival not from superior wings, but from the raw edge of his wits, frantically devising the Thach weave on the fly. A desperate, intricate ballet of mutual protection, where wingmen crisscrossed paths like threads weaving tight on a loom, covering each other's fatal blind spots in a hypnotic dance of deflection. It worked in fleeting bursts, saved a handful of lives, bought precious extra minutes in the furball. But at its core, it was a doctrine of pure defense, a bandage on a hemorrhage, never the path to true dominance. "We're dancing with death out there," Thach confessed Raleigh in a letter home, the cheap wartime paper crinkling audibly under the frustrated clench of his fist. And every desperate step, I swear I feel the empty chairs in the briefing room multiplying, like shadows lengthening at dusk. The psychological empire of the Zero stretched its insidious tendrils even further, beyond the immediate clash of wings. Japanese aces, bloodied but unbowed, returned to the reverent decks of carriers like the proud Akagi and the formidable Kaga, not as mere warriors, but as living demigods. Greeted with solemn tea ceremonies under lantern light, their exploits murmured in hushed geisha whispers that wove tales of untouchable invincibility into the fabric of imperial morale. Their confidence wasn't hollow bravado born of propaganda. It was hammered true in the forges of unchallenged skies, victory after unchallenged victory, stacking like cordwood. Those early lightning raids on the Philippines and the oil-rich Dutch East Indies had seen Zeros strike with surgical ferocity, swooping from the sun, vanishing into the haze like vengeful mist, leaving Allied air forces in smoldering ruin. American pilots, hunched over dog-eared intel reports in the stifling humidity of forward-ready rooms, felt that invisible weight settle like lead in their chests. Chalk dust swirled as instructors scratched frantic diagrams on blackboards, looping arcs of turn radii, shaded envelopes of maximum speed, urgent annotations in white against the green slate. Stay high, hit and run. Never, ever get suckered into a turning fight. The voices droned, authoritative but edged with their own buried strain. Yet doubt whispered far louder in the quiet hours, an insidious chorus. What if they close the gap anyway? What if the weave unravels in the merge? What if I'm the one they immortalize in their logs as Splash One, just another tally mark on Sakai's fuselage? By the blood-drenched fall of 42, the inexorable toll only mounted, wave after wave. The infamous slot, that treacherous, narrow corridor of hell snaking between the Solomon Islands' volcanic silhouettes, became a nightly abattoir where wildcats bled out in futile stands against overwhelming Zero swarms, their tracers lacing the twilight like futile fireflies. Pilot after pilot vanished into the ledger. Ensign Butch O'Hare, already a spectral Medal of Honor recipient for his lone wolf stand over the crippled Lexington earlier that year, flew mission after grinding mission where hard-won victory tasted only of bitter ash on the tongue. He'd nurse a Zero into his gun sight, the recoil shuddering up his arms like Judgment Day as his Brownings hammered home, only to watch 3 more spectral fighters materialize out of the glaring sun, wings glinting like scimitars. They're everywhere, Mac. He'd radio his wingman across the crackling ether, his voice a model of Midwestern steadiness, but laced with the gravel of exhaustion. Like shadows grown teeth, hungry and without number. The human cost piled inexorably. Over 200 American aviators lost in the crucible of the first 6 months of the Solomons campaign alone, their telegrams winging home like carrier pigeons of doom to farms and factories across the heartland, where families scanned doorsteps with dread, coiling tighter than smoke from a fresh crash site. Fear, that unseen assassin, killed as surely as any 20mm shell ripping through a cockpit. It bred fatal hesitation, a mere split-second glance at the whirling altimeter instead of locking eyes on the hurtling merge, a moment's freeze that spelled the difference between evasion and eulogy. It transformed battle-hardened aces into mere survivors, and those survivors into cold statistics etched on Western Union forms. Doctrine evolved in frantic patches. Carriers slunk to the battle's ragged edges. Pilots murmured half-forgotten prayers for providential cloud cover to break the sun's glare. But prayer, for all its solace, wasn't enough to rewrite the brutal physics. The Zero's empty weight hovered under 4,000 pounds, its innovative wings folding inward like intricate origami to nestle tight in carrier hangars. America's armored retort, the Wildcat, tipped the scales at nearly twice that heft. Built to endure the hits, it simply couldn't outdodge in the agile realm of close-quarters combat. Yet even amid those grim ledgers of irreplaceable loss, faint whispers of defiance began to stir like embers in a dying fire. From the blood-slicked, wave-lashed decks of the Enterprise, from the shadowed, cigarette-hazed briefings where empty folding chairs stood as mocking sentinels to the absent, came not a howl for vengeance, but a deeper, more urgent demand. Redemption through reinvention. Build something better, not a vengeance machine, but a guardian. Something that transformed the deadly gamble of every takeoff into a hard-won guarantee of return. Lieutenant O'Hare, yanked fresh from the aerial meat grinder and carrying scars no metal could salve, would soon bear that raw plea across a continent and an ocean. Straight to a nondescript factory sprawl in Bethpage, Long Island, New York, where the urgent chatter of pneumatic rivet guns echoed like frantic Morse code, tapping out pleas from the front. The Zero's tyrannical reign seemed absolute, an unassailable throne of silk and speed. But absolutes, like empires built on sand, inevitably crack under the mounting pressure of desperation. And that pressure was inexorably building. In the whoosh of wind tunnels devouring blueprints, on the grease-stained drafting tables of sleepless engineers, in the quiet, choking grief of men who'd buried far too many friends beneath foreign palms. But fear wasn't invincible, and the answer was already being built. Deep in the industrial heart of Long Island, New York, where the sprawl of wartime factories choked the horizon with smoke and steel girders, the Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation hummed like a hive under siege. It was late October 1942, and the air in Bethpage carried the sharp tang of machine oil and molten rivets, mingling with the faint, acrid bite of fear smuggled in on the wings of returning pilots. This wasn't a place of polished prototypes or champagne unveilings. It was a forge of frantic ingenuity, where draftsmen hunched over glowing blue lines until their eyes burned, and welders sparked arcs that lit the night shifts like false dawns. Grumman, nicknamed the Iron Works for its unyielding beasts like the Wildcat, had become America's anvil in the Pacific Air War, hammering out survival from the raw ore of desperation. But even their toughest bird, the F4F, was cracking under the Zero's relentless beak. Reports flooded in from the slot. Wildcats returning with wings holed like Swiss cheese, pilots nursing grudges against engines that overheated in pursuit, fuselages crumpling in turns that begged for mercy. The numbers didn't lie, kill ratios hovering at 1-1 or worse, each victory a Pyrrhic scar on the squadron rosters. Washington demanded more. The fleet screamed for it, and now, a living legend stepped through the chain-link gates, carrying the weight of empty cockpits in his duffel. Lieutenant Edward Butch O'Hare, America's first W-2 ace, the boyish hero who'd single-handedly downed 5 bombers over the Lexington in a feat that splashed across every front-page headline from Chicago to Coronado, arrived unannounced, his uniform rumpled from the cross-country hall, eyes shadowed by the ghosts of Guadalcanal. At 28, he looked younger, almost fragile, but his voice cut through the din like a 50-cal round. He'd been yanked from the front for this, a whirlwind tour to whisper truths to the builders, truths too raw for telegrams. O'Hare didn't strut into the executive offices. He made straight for the engineering bullpen, where the air thrummed with the slap of T-squares and the hiss of blueprint steamers. William Schwendler, Grumman's chief engineer, a wiry, bespectacled Prussian émigré with hands stained blue from ink and a mind like a slide rule, looked up from a sprawl of wind tunnel data, his face a map of perpetual calculation. Beside him, Leroy Grumman himself, the company's founder, leaned against a drafting table, pipe clenched in teeth yellowed by too many all-nighters. The room fell quiet as O'Hare dropped his flight jacket over a chair, the leather sighing like a weary sigh. O'Hare said, "Gentlemen, I've seen your Wildcat up close. Tough as a baroom brawler, takes a licking and keeps swinging. But out there, against the Zero, it's like arm wrestling a ghost. They climb away before you can blink, turn inside your dreams, and hit from angles that make you question gravity. Last week, over the slot, I watched 3 good men, my men, spiral in because we couldn't close the deal. Not bad flying, not bad luck, just bad wings." Schwendler adjusted his glasses, the lenses catching the harsh fluorescence like twin searchlights. He wasn't a man for theatrics. Engineering was duty, precision his religion. But O'Hare's words landed like shrapnel, pocking the calm. Grumman puffed his pipe, the cherry glowing like a warning flare. They'd heard the reports, of course, pored over them in late-night sessions, cross-referencing crash debris photos with captured Zero specs smuggled from Rabaul. The Zero's secret? Sacrifice. No armor, minimal armament, a fuel system that turned planes into fireballs on a good hit. But freedom. Oh, the freedom it bought in the sky. Grumman's Wildcat, built for the long haul, armored against the dive bomber era, now paid the price in agility. Overweight by design, underpowered in the climb, it fought like a heavyweight against a welterweight's speed. Schwendler said, "Lieutenant, we've got the XF6F on the boards. Our answer. Bigger Pratt & Whitney, wider wings for lift, not turns. But the Navy's breathing down our necks for production yesterday. Contracts piling up like storm clouds. One wrong rivet and we're shipping coffins with propellers." O'Hare leaned in, his fists planted on the table, blueprints crinkling under his knuckles. This wasn't a plea from a desk jockey. It was battlefield gospel, distilled from the whine of stressed wings and the silence of missing wingmen. Build something that brings them home, he thought, the words burning unsaid but etched in every line of his face. He'd lost count of the telegrams he'd signed, the folded flags handed over with apologies. The Pacific wasn't forgiving errors, it devoured them. And in that bullpen, amid the scatter of slide rules and coffee rings, the inciting spark ignited. Not with fanfare, but with a quiet sentence that hung in the room like smoke after a salvo. O'Hare said, "Then don't build for yesterday. Build for the boys who won't see tomorrow if you don't. Give us power to chase, not just endure. Visibility so we spot the bastards first. Control that doesn't fight the stick like a mule. And armor, real armor, that lets a man limp home with holes in his soul but not his hide. The Zero's a knife in the dark. We need a goddamn shield that bites back." The room exhaled. Grumman nodded once, slow as a carrier's bow turning into swell. Schwendler pulled a fresh sheet, pencil already scratching arcs, wing roots thickening, engine nacelles ballooning to cradle the beastly R2800 Double Wasp, a 2,000 horsepower monster that could swallow the Zero's sockeye whole. It was no small ask. The Navy had greenlit the Hellcat concept in '41, a paper tiger chasing the Wildcat's shadow, but O'Hare's urgency lit the fuse. Pressure mounted like monsoon rains, deadlines slashed from years to months, prototypes demanded by spring '43. Grumman's floors, cramped, echoing with the clatter of jigsaws and the profane poetry of sheet metal workers, became a pressure cooker. Women in overalls, Rosie the riveters with calluses like merit badges, fed aluminum into stamping presses that groaned under the load. Engineers chained to desks, fueled by black coffee and benzodrine, wrestled with thermodynamics. How to cool that fire-breathing radial without turning the cowling into a blast furnace. Rivets screamed under torque tests, prototypes buckling in static load frames until the frames gave first. But amid the grind, blueprint miracles began to unfold, quiet genius answering grief's call. Schwendler, the relentless precisionist, championed the stingray tail, a broad, stabilizing vertical fin that tamed the Hellcat's yaw like a ship's rudder in a gale, turning wild spins into controlled hunts. Visibility? They carved the cowling low, raked the windshield like a bomber's greenhouse, gave pilots a perch to scan the horizon without craning like a meerkat. The wings, oh those wings, stretched 42 feet tip to tip, not for graceful turns but for raw lift, folding upward with hydraulic grace to nestle in carrier bowels. And the underbelly? A cavernous bay for self-sealing tanks, 50 cal belts slung like bandoliers, ready to pour 400 rounds per gun in sustained fury. No more anemic bursts. This was a storm of lead. Robert Hall, the test pilot with nerves of nitinol, became the beating heart of it all. A lanky Ohio farm boy who'd barnstormed county fairs before the war, Hall strapped into mock-ups rigged to gimbals, yanking sticks until sweat soaked his flight suit. "She'll climb like a homesick angel," he'd report after a session, voice hoarse from shouting over wind tunnel howl. But doubt gnawed, always doubt. The R2800, that glorious beast, guzzled fuel like a submariner on Liberty, and early mock-ups overheated, cylinders glowing cherry red under load. Time versus death, every delay meant another Wildcat splashing into the slot, another family etching a star on a service flag. Schwendler paced nights, inner thoughts a whirlwind. If we get the cowl flaps wrong, it's all for nothing. A brick with wings. O'Hare lingered a week, haunting the floors like a talisman. He'd corner young draftsmen fresh from MIT, sketching dogfight geometries on napkins, vectors of pursuit, angles of deflection. "Feel this," he'd say, pressing a shard of Zero wreckage into their palms, jagged aluminum warm from his pocket. Light as sin, deadly as regret. His warnings weren't rants. They were roadmaps, etched from the front. One evening, in a smoke-filled conference room overlooking the assembly line, sparks flying like fireflies in hell, O'Hare gathered the team. Schwendler, Hall, a clutch of aerodynamics whizzes nursing migraines. O'Hare said, I've danced with zeros that made aces look like amateurs. Sakai himself slipped my six like oil through cracks. But if you give us this Hellcat, we'll rewrite the steps, not weave to survive, hunt to end it. Hall, fiddling with a torque wrench, met his gaze. We'll make her sing, Butch, but she won't be pretty. Big, mean, built to bully the sky. Grumman chuckled, a rare rumble. Pretty don't win wars, homecomings do. The miracles accelerated. A breakthrough in the carburetor. Water methanol injection to cram denser air into the cylinders, spiking power to 2,200 horses for emergencies. Armored glass in the canopy, bullet-resistant like a tank's viewport, and the gun sight, a British import reflector that turned guesses into geometry, framing kills like a photographer's viewfinder. Pressure bent them, but didn't break. It forged. By November's end, the first full-scale mock-up loomed in the hangar, a skeletal giant, ribs of spruce and steel, waiting for skin. O'Hare boarded his transport east, bound for rejoin the fleet, but his voice echoed in the drafts. Bring them home. In Bethpage, the rivet guns chattered on, a Morse code of resolve. Young pilots, stateside for transition training, peeked through fences at the beast taking shape, hope flickering in eyes still haunted by instructors' warnings. She'll be your shield, they were told, your sword. Doubt lingered, but so did the ghosts, urging, demanding. The Zero's empire trembled, unseen, as America's answer coalesced from ink and iron. They weren't building a fighter. They were building a promise. Winter 1943 gripped Bethpage like a vice, the Long Island chill seeping through the hangar doors as if the Pacific's ghosts had followed the blueprints north. Snow flurried against the chain-link fences, blanketing the runways in a deceptive hush. But inside Grumman's cavernous bays, the air thrummed with defiance. A cacophony of torque wrenches clanging, air compressors hissing like coiled serpents, and the low growl of generators feeding arc lights that banished shadows from the assembly line. The F6F prototype, that skeletal promise from O'Hare's warnings, had fleshed out into a hulking silhouette. 15 feet of snarling fuselage, wings splayed like a raptor's in mid-strike, the massive R2800 radial engine cowled in a blunt snout that promised thunder. She wasn't elegant, no sweeping lines like the Zero's poetry, but brute, purposeful. A blue-gray behemoth weighing 9,000 pounds empty, armored belly deep in steel plate and optimism. The Navy brass, pacing the viewing platforms with stopwatches and furrowed brows, dubbed her the Hellcat in a moment of gallows humor, the name sticking like rivet compound. But names meant nothing without flight, and flight meant risk. Raw, unforgiving risk that turned engineers into pallbearers and test pilots into gamblers, staking their lives on slide rule prayers. Robert Hall, the farm boy ace of the skies, drew the short straw for the maiden voyage. At 32, with a jaw like chiseled granite and eyes that scanned horizons before coffee cooled, Hall had danced death in P-40s over Burma. But this was virgin territory, a machine unblooded and untamed. He climbed the rolling ladder to the cockpit that frosty February morning, the aluminum cold as a scalpel under his gloves, the scent of fresh dope and unburnt avgas thick in his nostrils. The seat, canvas and steel unyielding, cradled him like a judgment, instruments winking alive as he flipped master switches, gyros whirring to life, fuel pumps sloshing like a heartbeat. Ground crew swarmed below, props blurred in their hands, faces upturned, young faces mostly, riveters and mechanics who'd traded factory whistles for war bonds, their breaths fogging in the bite. Hall's hands, steady as plow reins, gripped the stick, throttle quadrant, a forest of levers. She's heavy, this one, he thought, the words a quiet mantra against the doubt clawing his gut. Heavy as hope. Don't buck me now. The engine caught on the third blade, cough, bark, roar. The double wasp igniting with a bellow that shook rivets loose and sent snow devils swirling across the tarmac. 18 cylinders thundered in symphony, 2,000 horses straining at the leash, exhaust stacks belching blue smoke that smelled of promise and peril. Hall taxied slow, the tail dragging like a reluctant bride, visibility forward, a slit through the armored windshield, better than the Wildcat's greenhouse, but still a tunnel into the unknown. The runway stretched ahead, a scarred strip of packed snow and gravel, wind whispering across from the sound. Clearance came crackling over the headset. XF6F cleared for takeoff, winds 10 knots left. Godspeed. Hall eased the throttle, the beast lurching forward, gathering speed with a voracious hunger. 60, 80, 100. The tail lifting at 90, manes clawing the ground until rotation at 110, a gentle haunch, and she leaped. The Hellcat didn't climb. She surged, wings biting air with greedy authority, the horizon dropping away like a surrendered foe. Hall banked shallow, feeling the controls, hydraulic-assisted, firm but forgiving. Translate his intent without the Wildcat's mule kick protest. Altitude spooled to 5,000 feet in under 4 minutes. The R-2800 purring smooth, no overheating stutter, cowl flaps cycling like obedient lungs. He pushed her then. Throttle to the wall, supercharger whining high, speed bleeding past 300 in level flight, the Pacific's ghost winds buffeting but not breaking her poise. A loop, stick back, the world inverting in a rush of gray sky and Long Island green, G-forces pinning him like a lover's embrace, zeroing out at the top with nary a stall warning burp. Rolls snapped crisp, the stingray tail biting yaw like a terrier on a rat. Hall's grin cracked wide beneath his oxygen mask, the radio alive with whoops from the tower. Bethpage, Hellcat. She's a witch, warlock more like, climbs like she hates the ground. But triumph was fleeting. Doubt was the prototype shadow, lurking in every data sheet and stress test. Back on the deck, Hall debriefed in the wind tunnel annex, a concrete bunker reeking of ozone and stale sandwiches, where Schwendler pored over telemetry strips like a surgeon tracing veins. The numbers sang: climb rate 3,500 feet per minute, service ceiling 37,000 feet, a turn radius wide but stable, no zeros knife-edge pirouettes, but a hunter's deliberate arc. Visibility? Hall raved. The low cowl let him crane necks without whiplash, spotting mock bogies towed on cables from half a mile out. Yet cracks showed. The undercarriage groaned on retraction, gear doors flexing like weary knees. Early dives hit mock flutter, wings shuddering as if allergic to speed. And power? Glorious, until it wasn't. The prop, a four-blade beast, pitched too coarse at low speeds, turning takeoffs into arm wrestles. She's got heart, Hall admitted, wiping grease from his brow, but lungs of iron. One cough in combat and we're gliders. Schwendler didn't flinch, he iterated, relentless as tide. Nights blurred into weeks, the hangar a forge of fevered fixes. Riveters swarmed the airframe, hammering reinforcements into spar roots that had wept under load tests, aluminum screaming in protest, sparks dancing like fireflies in the chill. Breakthroughs came in bursts, a redesigned oil cooler, baffled to sip air without gulping drag, dropping cruise fuel burn by 10%. Carburetor tweaks, Schwendler's obsession, injected water methanol slurry for burst power, spiking output to 2,200 horses, enough to outrun a zero in a straight dash or claw altitude in a yo-yo. But danger? It prowled every hop. Hall's second flight, a high-altitude profile, turned sour at 30,000 feet. The supercharger lagged, RPMs dipping, the Hellcat wallowing like a drunk in a brawl. Not now, Hall gritted, inner voice steel. He nursed her down, feathering mixtures, the Long Island coast a smear below. Touchdown rough, tires screeching, props kissing gravel, but whole. The crew mobbed him, faces ashen. Thought you'd buy it up there, Bob. Hall laughed it off, but sleep came fitful, dreams of spirals and silence. John Thach, summoned from Norfolk for evaluation, brought the tactician's scalpel. The Weave's architect, his face lined like a well-thumbed manual, strapped in for a tandem hop. Hall in front, Thach observer, the cockpit a sardine can of sweat and maps. They ran mock dogfights against Wildcats playing bandit, orange smoke marking kills. The Hellcat's mass told she couldn't outturn a zero facsimile, but in the boom and zoom Thach preached, she excelled. Diving from perch like a peregrine, 50 cals stitching hulls at 400 yards, then ballooning away unscathed. No more dancing, Thach radioed, voice crackling with rare fire. This is leading the waltz. But doubt gnawed deeper. Fuel endurance clocked short, internal tanks for 1,000 miles, but combat burn halved it, stranding pilots over blue nowhere. Armor plate, vital as a ribcage, added drag that bled speed in prolonged hunts. And the guns? 650s harmonized thunderous, but early bursts jammed from vibration, rounds tumbling like drunk sailors. Schwendler cursed in German, inner storm raging, precision or perish. One flaw, and O'Hare's ghosts multiply. The peril peaked in April, a routine envelope expansion gone feral. Hall pushed for V never exceed speed, over the sound, the Hellcat arrowing at 425 miles per hour, airframe teening like a banshee. Then a flutter, deep in the wing, harmonic vibrations marching up the spars like an earthquake's footfalls. Alarms wailed, stick bucking wild. Hall hauled back, trading airspeed for altitude, the world a blur of panic and prayer. Mayday, Bethpage. Structural buffet, descending. The tower's reply drowned in static, crew scattering like ants as he greased her onto the grass overrun, props carving furrows, undercarriage collapsing in a symphony of snaps and hisses. Hall tumbled clear, oxygen mask askew, the Hellcat slewing to a halt in a plume of dirt and smoke, bent but breathing. Medics swarmed, but he waved them off, staggering to Schwendler amid the wreckage. "Told you the flaps were twitchy. Reinforce the roots, or she'll shake herself to splinters." Schwendler nodded, face a mask of granite grief. Another month lost, another invoice to the dead. But from the autopsy came gold. Wing skins thickened, ailerons mass balanced to dampen flutter, dive brakes added like scars to vent speed. Hall, bandaged but unbowed, flew the rebuild in May. The fixes singing true, stable at 450, dives like greased lightning. Young pilots, rotating through for familiarization, climbed in next, farm boys and city slickers, eyes wide as the cockpit's girth. One, Ensign Tommy Blackburn, lanky Texan with a drawl like molasses, taxied out trembling, the R-2800's whine waking hope in his chest. Not a gamble anymore, he thought, rotation smooth as silk. A bet, I can win. Returns swelled, 90% uptime, no major losses. Doubt? It lingered in the margins. Cost overruns ballooning to $50,000 per airframe, production snarls as factories retooled for the beast. But breakthroughs outweighed them. The folding wings tested flawless, hydraulics snicking shut like a safecracker's art. The reflector sight, calibrated in mock furballs, turned greenhorns into marksmen overnight. By summer's cusp, the Hellcat wasn't prototype. She was prodigy, 411 miles per hour top end, armor shrugging 20mm hits in live fire trials, endurance stretched to 1,200 miles with drop tanks like faithful hounds. Thach penned endorsements that flew to Buair like carrier pigeons, dominance, not parody. Hall, nursing a scotch in the officers' club, raised a glass to the ghosts. "To the keepers," he toasted Schwendler. "You didn't just build wings, you built wings that fight back." Schwendler clinked, rare smile cracking. Duty done. Now let her loose. The hangar doors yawned wider, production F6Fs rolling off jigs like thunderheads massing. Young pilots strapped in, ghosts fading in the rear view. The Pacific called, and the beast answered, not with perfection, but with purpose. When it lifted off, it wasn't perfect, but it was enough to change everything. Summer 1943 broke over the Pacific like a fever dream, the sun a relentless hammer forging islands into crucibles of salt and steel. Carriers like the USS Yorktown, reborn from Midway's grave, her decks scarred but unbowed, steamed through swells that carried the ghosts of lost squadrons. The slot still bled, Guadalcanal's shadow lingering like a bruise, but change stirred in the hangars. Crates stamped F6F, the Hellcat's angular bulk folded tight as a promise kept. VF5, John Thach's old outfit, drew first blood with the new beast. Thach himself, now a grizzled lieutenant commander, overseeing the transition from the bridge, his eyes scanning the horizon for the Zero's telltale glint. No more Wildcat's reluctant growl. The Hellcat's R-2800 spooled up with a baritone roar that vibrated through the deck plates, exhaust staining the dawn blue as young pilots, faces a mix of green doubt and forged resolve, climbed aboard. Ensign Tommy Blackburn, the Texan from Bethpage trials, strapped in first for combat quals, his hands steady on the stick but heart thumping like a bass drum. She feels right, he thought, the armored seat a cradle against the void. Like she knows the hunt. Deck crews, hands raw from chocks and hoses, watched with breaths held. Counting launches now, not just prayers for returns. The air hung heavy with avgas reek and the faint metallic tang of fear's retreat. The inciting missions came not with fanfare, but with the quiet urgency of survival's math. Wake Island, that forsaken atoll ringed by coral teeth, called first. A raid to soften Japanese garrisons, Hellcats escorting Avengers in a dawn strike. Thach led the cap from Yorktown's catapults, 12 blue-gray hunters slingshotting into the trade winds, props chewing air at 2,500 RPM. The flight south took hours, drop tanks jettisoned like shed skins over empty blue, the formation a loose echelon scanning for bandits. Japanese radar, Primitive but prying, pinged them at 50 miles out, and from Wake's battered airstrips, Zeros rose like vengeful wasps. 16 A6M2s, veterans of the slot, with kill flags fluttering from cowls. Saburo Sakai wasn't among them this day, but his shadow loomed. Pilots like Lieutenant Hinoki, ace, with 12 splashes, confident in the Zero's silk-smooth turns, their Sakai engines purring like contented cats. Americans come again, Hinoki thought, throttling up, the atoll shrinking below. Fat wildcats, easy meat. But as the merge loomed, silhouettes sharpened. Not the stubby F4Fs, but something hulking, deliberate, a new predator with a maw of 50 cal muzzles glinting in the sun. The first pass was biblical. Hellcats from 10,000 feet, Thach's voice calm over the radio. Cap, this is lead. Dive and zoom, perch high. Let 'em chase. They stooped like hawks, airspeed building to 400, the world compressing into a tunnel of wind roar and adrenaline spike. Blackburn peeled off first, lining a 0 in his N3 sight, the reflector framing it crisp as a target card. Squeeze. 6 guns harmonizing in a 2-second burst, 400 rounds per hammering lead that stitched the enemy's wing route. The 0 jittered, smoke blooming black from the nacelle, pilot bailing in a pink chute that fluttered seaward like a dying moth. Splash 1. Hinoki, twisting desperate in his namesake's wake, felt the shift. A Hellcat's dive too steep, too fast, pulling away unscathed where a wildcat would stall and prey. He banked hard, the Zero's agility his edge, looping inverted to slash at a straggler's 6. But the American didn't bite. He climbed, ballooning altitude with the Hellcat's fat wings, then reversed in a hammerhead that left Hinoki exposed. Tracers converged, Thach's wingman, Lieutenant Swede Vetasa, stitching fire across the canopy. Hinoki's 0 cartwheeled, fuel igniting in a roiling fireball that lit the atoll's lagoon orange. 2 down, and the furball ignited. Fear didn't flip in a heartbeat. It cracked, then shattered. Japanese pilots, bred on unchallenged dominance, found their turns meaningless. The Hellcat's mass shrugged off scissors, its power reclaiming height in yo-yos that turned defense into ambush. A 0 ace, Lieutenant Tamura, with Nishizawa's ghost in his tactics, dove on Blackburn's tail, 20mm shells pocking the Hellcat's armor like rain on tin. Blackburn felt the thumps, one vibration shuddering through the seat, but no fire. No alarms. The self-sealing tanks held, armored glass spiderwebbing but intact. Taking hits, but she's iron, he teed, yanking into a split S that bled speed but broke the pursuit. Tamura pressed, agile as ever, but the Hellcat's dive brakes snapped open like a falcon's talons, shedding velocity in a heartbeat, allowing Blackburn to reverse and fire upward, a deflection shot that holed Tamura's engine. Oil smoked, the 0 muscling for altitude it couldn't reach, the Hellcat's climb rate, 3,500 feet per minute, turning pursuit into procession. Tamura's last thought, what beast is this? As his prop windmilled to silence, gliding to a water landing amid shark shadows. Returns to Yorktown were ragged but whole, 10 of 12, the deck erupting in whoops as arrestor wires snagged hooks, tires smoking on the rollout. Crews swarmed, hoses dousing 50 cal barrels still hot, hands clapping, shoulders slick with sweat. Thach taxied forward, canopy popping, his face a mask of quiet thunder. She did it, boys. Brought us home with teeth. Deck Chief Ramirez, a stocky Filipino with tattoos of lost brothers, chalked the wheels, eyes shining. No empties today. Just tallies, 5 zeros confirmed, 2 probables. Word crackled back to Pearl, first blood for the Hellcat, ratios tilting 5-1. But Wake was appetizer. The main course brewed off Marcus Island, a volcanic speck in the Bonins, Japanese stronghold bristling with AA and 0 patrols guarding Tokyo's outer door. October's moonless night saw Prinz Eugen, Enterprise now, flagship Grimm, launching 24 Hellcats from VF-16 under cover of squalls, mission, night intercept to blunt a resupply convoy. Commander Ham Hamilton led, a Thach protege with a mustache like a broom and instincts honed in the slot. The Hellcats ghosted low, radar directed by the carrier Seegzam, the R-2800 muted to a burr under baffles. Japanese pickets, 4 zeros on Dawncap, rose to challenge, their pilots groggy from sock toasts, expecting the old weave. But Hamilton's formation pounced from the black, visibility the Hellcat's ace. Low cowl framing stars, pilot spotting exhaust glow at 2 miles. Tally-ho, Angels 5 bearing 270, Hamilton barked, diving piecemeal. The lead 0 never saw it, A Hellcat silhouette blotting the moon, guns winking fire that eviscerated the cockpit. Pilot slumped, plane nosing earthward in a silent spiral. The others scattered, agility frantic in the dark, but Hellcats climbed away, then stooped again. Boom after zoom, the tactic Thach etched in blood now amplified by wings that endured. One Japanese pilot, Ensign Kato, fresh from Rabaul, cocky with 3 kills, latched onto a Hellcat 6, his zero turning tight as a corkscrew, cannons flashing. Hits raked the American's fuselage, shreds of skin peeling like confetti, but the beast-absorbed pilot, Irish Mahoney, grunting as controls stiffened but held. Come on, girl, Irish thought, hauling into a climbing turn that used the Hellcat's torque to scissors away. Kato overshot, exposed belly up, and Irish reversed. A flat scissors, then guns hot. Tracers marched up the Zero's length, igniting the wing root in a flash that silhouetted Kato's horror. Too slow. Too heavy. No. Parachute bloomed late, snagged in flames, the sea claiming another. 6 Zeros down that night. Hellcats limping back with patchwork but pride intact. Hamilton's debrief, over lukewarm Joe in the ready room, crackled electric. They came at us like wolves. We hit like bears. No dances, just finishes. Crews tallied patches, the whine of sewing machines stitching wounds, but smiles cracked, fear's fracture widening. Guadalcanal, the marshal's jewel, sealed the shift. January 44, Essex-class carriers, Intrepid Cabot, hurling 36 Hellcats from VF-9 and VF-12 in a dawn sweep to pave the atoll for invasion. Japanese air strength peaked here. 80 Zeros scrambling from reef runways, aces like Captain Rusty Ryan's nightmare, veterans shaken by whispers of the American monster. Letter Commander Killer Kane led the cap, his voice a steady beacon. Stay high, hit hard. She's built for this. The merge was apocalypse. Zeros swarming in classic density, turning fights blooming like ink in water. But the Hellcat's certainty carved lanes. Dives from 15,000, speeds brushing 550 cals, reaping in passes that left trails of debris. Blackburn, now with 4 kills, down 2 in a single loop. A Zero pair scissorsing futile, his perch reclaiming height to pounce again. Japanese pilots radioed panic. Enemy new type, fast climb, heavy fire, evade. One ace, Lilter Yamamoto, Nishizawa's shadow, 18 victories, felt the dread coil as his Zero stalled in pursuit, a Hellcat ballooning above, then diving like judgment. Shells punched his canopy, glass shattering inward. He bailed, floating amid the furball, watching his empire unravel. 27 Zeros splashed, ratios 19-1, the atoll's skies cleared for Marines waiting pink waters. Returns flooded the decks, 32 of 36, hooks snagging wires in a ballet of survival. Crews, hands shaking less now, fueled and armed for the next wave, the slap of waves a rhythm of rebirth. Thach, observing from Cabot, penned home. The boys laugh now. Before the bell. Japanese logs, captured later, whispered the flip. Pilots dreading dawn, Zeros grounded in doubt. Fear, once America's chain, now bound the hunters hunted. For the first time in years, American pilots smiled before takeoff. June 1944 dawned blood red over the Marianas, the vast archipelago a scattered chain of emerald hells where volcanic peaks pierced the Pacific like jagged accusations. Operation Forager, the Allied thrust to seize Saipan, Tinian, Guam, unleashed the full fury of America's carrier might. 15 flat-tops steaming in Task Force 58, Mitcher's Armada, a floating fortress of steel and vengeance. Hellcats, now the Navy's iron fist, crammed the decks, over 200 F6Fs from squadrons like VF-15 on Essex, VF-51 on San Jacinto, their blue-gray hides scarred from Guadalcanal but unbowed, engines idling like predators scenting prey. No more tentative patrols, this was invasion cover, air superiority seized outright. Japanese high command, blind to the storm, hurled 373 aircraft from the home islands and forward bases. Zeros, Judies, Valse, a desperate shoal of silk and bamboo flung into the grinder. Admiral Ozawa's fleet, the last gasp of carrier might, lurked 300 miles west, but the skies above Saipan belonged first to the hunters. And on June 19th, as marine boots churned pink sand on the beaches below, the bell tolled for what pilots would etch in legend. The Marianas Turkey Shoot. Not a battle, a slaughter, where fear, once Japan's scepter, shattered like glass under the Hellcat's wing. The day cracked open at no 5:50, Hornets radar painting ghosts on the scopes, inbound raids, 50-plus strong, Vals and Kates droning low under Zero escort, aiming to stem the landings. Mitcher's cap groups, Commander Bat Masterson leading 24 Hellcats from Bunker Hill, launched into the nacreous dawn, the catapults hurling them skyward with steam blasts that echoed like artillery salutes. The air thrummed with the R-2800's symphony, deep, insatiable roars blending into a wall of sound that drowned the gulls and the surf's whisper. Ensign Alex Vrashew, a 25-year-old farm kid from Indiana with 6 kills already notched, taxied his F6F forward, the deck vibrating under his tires, sweat beading despite the chill. Crew Chief Pops Delaney, grizzled vet of Midway's Pyre, slapped the cowl twice. Ritual luck. Bring her home, kid, all of ya. Vrashew nodded, canopy sliding shut with a hydraulic snick, the world narrowing to gauges and the endless blue ahead. No ghosts today, he thought. Throttle advancing, the beast surging forward. Just payback. Launches rippled across the task force. 96 Hellcats aloft in the first wave. Formations wheeling south like iron geese, climbing to 20,000 feet where the air thinned to a razor edge. Japanese pilots, airborne from Guam's Oslito Field, and carriers like Taiho, flew with the old certainty. Zeros shepherding bombers in dense Vs, their Sakai engines a high-pitched keen against the Hellcat's bass growl. Lilk JG. Takeo Taki Shimada, a 22-year-old from Osaka with dreams of cherry blossoms, led a chutai of 9 A6Ms, his wings painted with fading kill silhouettes from Rabal. Yankees scatter before us, he radioed, voice steady with Bushido's fire, the atoll's smoke plume marking the invasion below. But as the Americans crested the horizon, silhouettes broad and deliberate, not the Wildcats' familiar stub, doubt flickered like a shorted wire. Radar had warned of new fighters, but reports were whispers, unheeded. Shimada's scope, crude hand-cranked, showed nothing. Visibility was their edge, or so they believed. Then the cap struck. Masterson's Hellcats from perch, diving at 500 miles per hour, the wind a banshee howl through open gun ports. Vrashew peeled high right, N3 sight locking a Zero's sunlit belly, the geometry perfect, lead computed, trigger featherlight. Burp. Lid storm, 2,400 rounds per minute per gun, the burst a fleeting thunderclap that eviscerated Shimada's engine in a gout of oil and flame. The Zero snapped inverted, pilot clawing for control, but the Hellcat was gone, zooming vertical, reclaiming angels like it owned the ladder. Shimada's last glimpse, the American climbing unmolested, a blue monolith against the dawn. Impossible. Heavy. How? Chute deployed late, the sea rushed up, cold and final. The furball erupted archipelago-wide, a chaos of corkscrews and contrails stitching the vault like frantic seams. Zeros turned to their strength, tight loops, scissors in the sun. But the Hellcats refused the dance. Thach's weave, once desperate defense, now a forgotten relic. Pilots like Dusty Rhodes from VF-16 dove and extended, their beasts absorbing 20mm lashes that would have gutted Wildcats. Rhodes felt it first. A Judy bomber in the fray, escorted by 2 Zeros, the lead slashing his 6. Shells drummed the fuselage, thunk, 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 sparks flying past the canopy, armor plate denting but holding, self-sealing tanks burping vapor that smelled of singed rubber. Hit but hail, extending. Rhodes keyed, hauling back on the stick, the Hellcat's torque rolling him out of line, dive brakes flaring to shed speed and reverse. The pursuing Zero overshot exposed, and Rhodes' wingman ends. Hawk Harlan pounced from the side, guns weaving a net of tracers that hold the fuel lines. The Zero trailed black smoke, pilot banking desperate for Guam, but Vrashew, orbiting above, intercepted. A head-on pass, both beasts thundering nose-to-nose, 50 cals trading fire in a mutual mauling. Vrashew's burst struck true, cockpit hold, the Zero tumbling earthward. Harlan whooped over the circuit. That's 6 for you, Alex. These birds eat lead for breakfast. Laughter crackled amid the static, nerves fraying into release, the first cracks in Fear's armor since 41. By noon, the tallies mounted like a ledger of retribution. 100 Japanese planes splashed, Hellcats losing just 3, to flak, not furballs. Japanese aces, once demigods, radioed bewilderment. Enemy superior, cannot engage, withdraw. Captain Minoru Samurai Genda, architect of Pearl Harbor's raid, watched from Zuikaku's bridge as his air groups evaporated, Zeros returning as cripples or none at all. One pilot, Let Akira Ghost Tanaka, 64 kills, Nishizawa's peer, latched onto a Hellcat pair over Tinian, his Zero twisting like a minnow through their weave attempt. But the Americans didn't turn. They climbed, the R-2800 supercharger whining to 2,200 horses on WEP, ballooning out of reach. Tanaka pressed, cannons barking, hits raking a Hellcat's wing, sparks, shreds. But the beast shrugged, reversing in a chandelle that used its mass like a club. Litter J.G. Sully Sullivan, the target, felt the impacts shudder through his bones, inner voice a growl. "Not today, you silk bastard." He yanked the stick, the Hellcat's stability turning the reversal into a trap, Tanaka exposed low and slow. Sully's burst caught the Zero's tail, shearing elevators. It pitched up, stalled, then plummeted. Tanaka riding flames into the drink. The sky betrays us, the ace thought, the rising sun emblem mocking as it sank. Mitcher's after action in Lexington's flag plot, amid charts and cigarette haze, was grim poetry. 241 enemy aircraft downed over 2 days. Hellcats claiming 150 alone, ratios 21 soaring to legend. Losses? 29 Americans, mostly to ground fire or carrier accidents. Pilots returning ragged but returning. Decks swarmed at dusk, the sun dipping like a spent cartridge. Hooks snagging wires in flawless rhythm, crews hosing decks slick with oil and triumph. Varashu taxied to his spot, 6 more kills fresh, personal record, but his grin was weary, eyes scanning for empties. None. Pops cracked a flask of bootleg hooch, slapping Vrachew's shoulder. "Told ya, kid, she's the promise." Ready rooms buzzed later, blackboards chalked with silhouettes, zeros crossed out like debts settled. Thach, advisory from Pearl, wired congratulations. No prayers needed, just fuel and fury. Japanese carriers scouting next day steamed into Hellcat range. Taiho torpedoed, Shikoku gutted, but the chute's echo lingered. Ozawa's fleet gutted, air power bled white. Fear flipped, now haunted Tokyo's briefings. Pilots grounded, aces rationed like rice. The legacy unfurled like contrails in victory's wake. By war's end, 12,275 Hellcats rolled from Grumman's lines. Bethpage's rivets turned to thunder. Schwendler's precision a bulwark for 5,000 pilots' survival. Kill ratios? 19-1 overall. The beast downing 5,223 enemies, while losing 270 to fighters. Wildcats faded to trainers, Corsairs to ground attack. The Hellcat owned the Pacific Cap, escorting the drives to Okinawa, Iwo's Black Sands. But triumph carried ghosts, O'Hare's most poignant. Butch, the warning's voice, transitioned to the beast himself, commanding Air Group 6 on Enterprise by 44. His missions over the Slot, then Marianas, were master classes. 12 kills in the Hellcat, tallying 27 total, but fate's irony struck November 27, 1944. Night patrol off Oroti, leading TBMs against a snooper, O'Hare vanished into the black, his Hellcat a blip swallowed by radar ghosts. No wreckage, no shoot, just silence over the waves. Theories swirled. Friendly fire from Enterprise's own guns, or a Zero's lucky 20mm. Schwendler, reading the wire and Bethpage, stared at blueprints yellowed with age, inner grief a vice. We built the promise, but promises break. O'Hare's folded flag winged home to Chicago, his words etched in every cockpit plaque. Bring them home. The ghost lingered in every strap-in, a quiet guardian. Young pilots like Vrashew, mustanging to aces, felt it in the stick's sure grip. The whine of the double wasp spooling hope awake, deck crews hands steady under sunrise, no longer shaking. Japanese aces, Sakai among survivors, penned post-war laments. The Hellcat, the flying brick that flew, shattered invincibility, turning Bushido's dance into rout. Post-war she trained jets, chased smugglers off Korea, but her soul stayed Pacific. A signal that ingenuity, born of grief, could flip the hunted to hunters. Survival wasn't luck's lottery. It was wings worthy of the brave. It didn't make pilots brave. It gave brave pilots a future.